Hello, everybody, and welcome to our sessions entitled The Significance of Securing Accreditations with Different United Nations Bodies and International Conventions, Understanding the Process and its Impact. My name is Ngoc Anh, Lead Coordinator of the AfA Policy Coalitions, and I will be your host for today's sessions, along with Sam English, Wildlife Program Managers from ADM Capital Foundations. Welcome, Sam. I will hand over the floor to you to start the sessions.
Thank you very much, Ngoc Anh, and thank you to Asia for Animals for the opportunity to moderate this session today. So a little bit of background about me. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager for the ADM Capital Foundation, based out of Hong Kong. I'm a researcher with a lot of experience working on various environmental issues, chiefly in Asia, namely water security, cryospheric change, and the wildlife trade. I've been at ADM since 2016, overseeing projects on wildlife trade and crime. And I've been a lead author on numerous reports, mainly characterizing Hong Kong's significance in the global wildlife trade, both legal and illegal. And I'm also overseeing work that we do on the exotic pet trade, financial crime, and the convergence of wildlife and other forms of organized and serious crime. So thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to introduce our various speakers for the day. Ngoc Anh, if you wouldn't mind changing the slide. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jackson Sze, Director of Global Affairs and Disaster Resilience Programs at PAWS International. Dr. Sze has over 20 years of experience in the fields of emergency management, technical rescue, and humanitarian aid as a disaster practitioner with both civil society and government agencies. He's a veterinarian and conservation biologist who advocates for One Health, One Welfare programs. Dr. Sze is currently the Director of Global Affairs and Disaster Resilience Programs for Wir Pfoten, my apologies if I have mispronounced the German there, International, or for PAWS, in Vienna, Austria, and he serves as the organization's main representative to several United Nations bodies. Dr. Sze's department at Wir Pfoten International is making animal welfare an important part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through policy advocacy, diplomacy, and engagement with member states, and is assisting communities with animals affected by disasters through work in preparedness, community engagement, and response capacity development. Welcome, Dr. Jackson Sze, to our session today. Now, I believe I should also take a moment to introduce our other speakers. My apologies. It's my pleasure to welcome Nina Jamal and Teresa Pegger-Baur as well. Nina and Teresa are also from PAWS International. Nina Jamal is the International Head of Pandemics and Campaign Strategies at PAWS International, a global animal welfare organization for animals under direct human influence. Before taking on that role, and since 2013, Nina led the international campaigns on farm animals and nutrition campaigns at PAWS. Nina has also worked in the climate movement on campaigns and international policy within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations, as well as in the private sector on sustainability and UNIDO on the implementation of international multilateral environmental agreements. Her background is in environmental health sciences, public health, and international environmental policy. And working closely with Nina, Teresa is the Pandemics and Campaigns Program Manager at PAWS International. Teresa Pegger-Baur studied international economics and has a master's degree in human-animal interaction from the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna, Austria. She started working at PAWS International in 2016 and has managed the project Pandemics and Animal Welfare together with Nina Jamal since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Together with a broad network of multidisciplinary experts and NGOs worldwide, the team strives for a pandemic treaty which improves animal welfare, thus saving human and animal lives via a One Health approach. And finally, and certainly not least, we have Adeline Lerambert. She is the International Policy Specialist at the Born Free Foundation. She's been there since 2017 and is based out of the UK. Adeline's career ranges from environmental project management with the EU and global wildlife policy. Her recent work includes coordinating and amplifying the voice of animal protection organizations at the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity and the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Adeline is also involved in multiple joint advocacy initiatives with the WHO and UNODC processes, amongst others. She has a multidisciplinary background and is an alumnus of the Paris-Sorbonne University and Sciences Po Strasbourg, where she graduated with a master's degree in European policies and public affairs. She has a particular interest in mainstreaming wild animal welfare and biodiversity conservation into development policy. So that introduces our fantastic lineup of speakers. And so at this moment, I will take the opportunity to hand over to Dr. Jackson Z. Thank you. Oh, and absolutely, before I jump into the sessions, of course, if any questions do occur to you, please do put those into the chat boxes on either the Zoom or YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and the floor is yours, Dr. Z.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody can see the first slide clearly. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and to all of the presenters in this session. I'm happy to present today the power of international bodies for national animal protection groups. We're going to just begin so we don't take up too much time, so we have more time for questions. I like to start with a little quote. So in the end, we only conserve what we love. We love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. This was coined by Babadium in 1967, a Senegalese conservationist. Today's presentation from me really is a motivator for you, for all the attendees, about what do we do at the United Nations and why is it important. So this is the agenda. There's just 5 little sections. And I'm going to start with some definitions, if you don't mind. Animal welfare. So we use the model to explain animal welfare, and it used to be in a concept called the 5 freedoms. We've now evolved to what's called the 5 domains. The current 5 domains model says that animal welfare is an individual and subjective mental state, and it's the sum of all the mental experiences an individual animal or person at any given time in their life. So it only looks at the individual and not the sort of the whole group of animals. In conservation, we're going to talk about sort of what that means, and it really means protecting the ecosystems, the landscape, the environment, where the animal populations live. And it typically looks at habitat and these meta populations, so just the bigger groups of animals. Some of the words used today will be talking about advocacy. What does advocacy mean? Many groups might know what activism is. Advocacy is slightly different than campaigns even. So I propose that advocacy really is supporting speaking, engaging, understanding, and sharing with your member states. It can work alongside campaigns and activism methodologies, but today we're going to focus on the role of advocacy, diplomacy, and engagement. And there's many methodologies on how to advocate. When we speak about the United Nations, which seems like a big thing because it actually is very confusing, there are 6 main organs, as they call it, of the United Nations. You'll see it all here. We typically address 2 of the functions. We'll get into that in a moment. The United Nations, those 6 organs have subsidiary organs or other functions that they are responsible for. Some of them are regional and some of them are focused on a specific aspect of what the United Nations does. The United Nations' main function, as described in their mandate, is really about peace, harmony, prosperity, basically anti-war, because it was the product of after World War II to try to keep peace and security. But you'll see in this large list things that are maybe environmentally related or animal related, and many other functions that really secure human safety and peace and prosperity. In the United Nations, there are many, many different bodies. Here, just a sample of them. You might have heard of some of them. They help to build friendly relations amongst nations, achieve international cooperation, multilateralism, trying to harmonize the actions of different nations and by region. What they have been working on since before 2000, there was something in the past called the Millennial Development Goals. And they then evolved it in 2015 to the Sustainable Development Goals. You may have heard of them. It's also known as the 2030 Agenda. These 17 goals are what all the United Nations bodies work towards. And under these goals, there are very specific targets and indicators that measure them, and every country within 5 years must report against it for the United Nations to make sure that the world continues to be as sustainable as possible as it continues to develop. In our region, there are two interesting groups. The regionals, one is called SCAP, which is part of the United Nations, which you may not have heard of. And then there's another group called ASEAN, which you definitely should have heard of. And depending on the region in Asia, there are also other subgroups. But in SCAP, there are 53 member states, 9 associate members, and they only pursue the United Nations targets, which is what we're going to focus on today. When we advocate for animals, we use what's called a logic model. And what we believe, how we think can change the world, is that the international agenda currently does not include animal welfare sufficiently as a policy lens. What we wish to seek, or what we want to achieve, is really on the right-hand side, which is humans treat animals with respect, empathy, and understanding. The way that we do it is from left to right. We affect member states, which means the countries themselves, each individual nation. We influence them by engaging with them, speaking with them, learning from them, and helping to advance animal welfare in national policies so that decision-making at the national level can influence the international or the regional level. When we look at the key UN bodies that we consider for animal welfare work, it spans from sustainable development, climate change, pandemics, wildlife trade, food systems, biodiversity protection, animals and disasters, and generally the environment. These are the main bodies that are responsible for that work. However, it is not the only body because they have to interact with many other functions within the United Nations. And you'll see that it sometimes can get a little bit complex. Right now, we're going to deep dive into the international bodies and some of them so we can better understand where we can have influence. The other presenters will discuss the other, some of the other bodies that might be of interest to you today. So, national groups like yours, your NGOs have a unique and important role to play to protect animals in your country and the value they bring from your country into international policy making. We're going to talk about ECOSOC first. ECOSOC is the Economic and Social Department of the UN. It has its own section, its own organ, and they are responsible for the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and the voluntary national reviews. In this wonderful image, it is the research from a academic group that was published, and it tied animal welfare to every single Sustainable Development Goal. To give you some relevance, animals play a role in human development in all aspects. This paper can be found. The author is Keeling, and you just look up animal welfare and Sustainable Development Goals, and you will find it. What's particularly interesting for us is when we talk about no poverty, no hunger, really it's about food systems. Good health really is about one health, one welfare, water, energy, decent work, economic growth, industry innovation. These are all very much related to potentially how animals are utilized. Sustainable cities and communities really talks about food production and waste and loss, and then climate, life on land, and water, life in water. These are all very important. And then peace, justice, and strong institutions really talk about enforcement of these rules that can protect all of society, including all of the animals. When we talk about the UN FCCC, which is the climate body, we know that when climate shifts, animals suffer, people suffer, and we make sure that is intricately described in our work. Here's just a wonderful image to look at the feedback loops and the interactions between human well-being, the environment, health, and animals. And animal welfare considerations are increasingly integrated into climate action plans, participating in the COP, which you'll hear repeatedly, which means the convention of the parties. It just means a big meeting, and it happens maybe every 2 years or every year for each of these bodies that the governments come together to discuss policies and plans. When we talk about UNEP, which is the United Nations Environment Program, and UNEA, which is the Assembly, which is all of the countries that come together to make those decisions, they lead environmental protection efforts impacting animal welfare. UNEA convenes member states every 2 years or so. The opportunity really is advocate for animal-friendly policies, environmental agreements. Sometimes they forget us. They forget the individual animal. They only look at the whole landscape. And we believe that that's a quality question that is super important. Support sustainable practices, both benefiting animals and the environment, and raising awareness about the links between animal welfare and environmental sustainability. The UNDRR is the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. They have a policy framework called the Sendai Framework. It coordinates disaster risk reduction efforts, which includes animal welfare considerations. The Sendai Framework also promotes an animal-inclusive disaster preparedness and response plan. We continue to contribute to animal disaster plans and providing training for responders and advocating for animal welfare and disaster policies. Just so everybody knows that Asia Pacific is the region in the world that gets the most disasters out of the entire planet, mostly because of the numbers of people and the numbers of animals greatly affected that rely on an agricultural base for their economies. Very quickly through the regional bodies, we spoke about SCAP, which is the Socio-Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific. And what they have is a NGO sector. It's the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, where we can all participate. If you cannot attend the international, because it's so far away, it's very expensive, there is always a way to participate through your regional work, making sure that the Asian voice is heard. When we attend these meetings, we definitely miss our friends and colleagues from the Asia region to provide their voice to a lot of the discussions that are being had, decisions being made that affect all of us in the region and the animals that we care for. This is a group that I was asked to speak about. This is WOA, formerly known as the OIE. You may have heard of them. They work specifically as the chief veterinary officers and the veterinary authorities in each country. That's their function. This is where those representatives can come together. There is an animal welfare strategy for the Asia Pacific region. If you have an idea that you believe is important and you wish to participate, then there is no accreditation for WOA, but there is a wonderful NGO representation, and you're welcome to participate, get the emails, and understand what is made priority and how we can set priorities for the region for the animals that we wish to have better focus on. When we talk about all of these big policies and how to make these things work for animal welfare, development banks really come into play. Leveraging money is an important part of policy and where they report. So we work very closely with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the Asia Development Bank. This is just an example where funding to improve animal welfare has positive gains for society that then continues to improve how people live and work and surround themselves with nature so that we're climate adaptive and that we are sustainable. All of these things may seem like a lot. You'll hear more about it, but there are wonderful tools and resources and trainings that are free for you to engage, understand, and learn and share your valuable insights to these big discussions. In 2024, if you don't know, it's called a super election year. And the reason is there's over 64 countries that are going to be voting for new leaders, which will represent more than half the planet, so half the planet's population. So it's quite important. And the 2024 elections have the potential to shape the future of animal welfare. By staying informed, engaging with your representatives, understanding your national politics and policy work, supporting organizations at the United Nations, we can ensure that every single vote counts, not just for humans and human rights, but also for animals who we share the planet with. So we would like to invite you to join the movement, take action together. The Asia for Animals Coalition has a wonderful policy platform. Please engage with that. The power is our collective action. I encourage you to collaborate and partner to amplify our voice and your specific impact in your country, to speak with a united voice about animals, animal welfare, and animal sentience. And I wanted to let you know that the SCAP Regional 80th meeting will happen at the end of April in Bangkok. The high-level political forum in July will focus on this year, especially food systems and climate. And then there'll be a summit of the future because the UN has taken notice that there's a lot of breakdowns in multilateralism. This will happen in September, really talking about peace. And we believe that animal welfare is a key to bringing peace, harmony, and prosperity. And at the end of the year, our other colleagues may talk about the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, will happen in October, and UNFCCC COP29 will happen in November. All this information is available through the AfA Policy Coalition, and I'll close my presentation with another quote. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. So don't let somebody else make decisions on your behalf and what we believe is important. Make sure that you participate. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Jackson. I mean, a really inspiring presentation, and I mean, certainly a fantastic quote to end on. So I would like to hand over to our next speakers. I believe Nina Jamal and Teresa Pegger-Baur are up next. I'll hand over to you, ladies.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Jackson, for the fascinating presentation. Hi, everyone. I'm Nina, and my colleague Teresa will be speaking in a moment as well. We're going to zoom in on the pandemic's advocacy track. Jackson shared an overview of the key processes going on, and we'll share a little bit about pandemics. So when the pandemic began, governments were completely unprepared, and they realized that it was more than just a human health crisis. It was an economic crisis, and they also realized that our relationship to animals had something to do with it. So, perfect. So what it meant was the institutions that, from the institutions that Jackson mentioned, there were 4 institutions that we had to focus on. It wasn't just the World Health Organization. We had to also look at the Food and Agriculture Organization, UN Environment Program, and the World Organization for Animal Health, which is not a UN institution, but it's the only one specialized in animal welfare. So these institutions had to also follow a holistic approach. It wasn't just governments, it wasn't just us as animal welfare organizations saying we need a holistic approach. So they came together and they moved from becoming just the tripartite plus UNEP into a quadripartite. And from the overview that Jackson mentioned, these are then the institutions that we had to engage with. It wasn't just the quadripartite, it was also member states, but also other international processes and stakeholders who we had to work with either as targets, advocacy targets, or as allies. In terms of the advocacy steps that Jackson mentioned, we had to follow, of course, all of them. We had to first determine what our goal was, and our goal was to push for prevention of pandemics at source, so before a pathogen jumps from animals to humans, by improving animal welfare, and through a One Health approach, a holistic approach. Now, where we were was in the WHO, you had the international health regulations. They already existed, but their focus was just on the stage after an outbreak. It was the stage when an emergency begins. How do you define it as an emergency, and what do you do after? So when the pandemic happened, member states decided to develop this international pandemic instrument, and it's supposed to be concluded in May 2024. And the stakeholders who are leading the process are called the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. These are 6 countries representing each region and the Secretariat of the World Health Organization. And the part of this draft legal instrument that's being negotiated that is relevant to our work, relevant to animal welfare, is Article 4 on prevention and public health surveillance, Article 5 on One Health, and Article 6 on preparedness, readiness, and resilience. And here we found out which governments are leading the process, and they are basically the pen holders. So Japan, India, UK, and Northern Ireland, and Tanzania are the governments representing the interests of all other governments and holding the pen to draft these articles that we are focusing on. And the way that we're engaging is we're participating as NGOs in informal meetings and in the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body meetings. We're not allowed to attend the sessions among the member states. There are only a few limited opportunities that are open to NGOs, and Teresa is going to share a little bit more about that. But our approach is we're using tools that were created by the quadripartite institutions, that were created by a group of experts called the One Health Joint Plan of Action, One Health High-Level Action Panel, sorry. They developed, so they supported the quadripartite to develop the One Health Joint Plan of Action. And those are the basis for our advocacy work. So next slide. And so what we're asking for is, as I mentioned, we're asking for prioritizing the prevention of spillover, the stage where a pathogen jumps from animals to humans, through a One Health approach, while securing international cooperation, because we don't just need the World Health Organization to do its part. We need the other international institutions to work with the WHO. And what we're asking for is supporting communities who come into daily contact with animals and the environment in protecting themselves. This is, for us, what equity means. We're saying that protecting human health can be best secured by ending cruel practices like wildlife trade, live animal markets, and transitioning to more sustainable farming. Here, it's very important that when we're asking for this, we're asking for it while securing people's livelihoods. Communities who rely on this for their livelihoods are not going to stop unless they find alternative ways to survive. And what we're saying is that these measures will not only protect humans and animals, they also protect our ecosystems. So to protect human and animal health, we'll need to reduce the risk of zoonotic disease outbreaks. And this all makes sense, but it's not so easy. And Teresa is going to share why, what the obstacles are.
Thank you very much, Nina. Sorry, just had to unmute myself so that you can also hear me talking. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So we would like to share a little bit more background information of why it is important for us as civil society organizations, as animal welfare organizations and others to engage with WHO and to engage with WHO member states. The reason is we are confronted with several obstacles, and we need to overcome these obstacles to achieve an effective pandemic instrument which is rooted in One Health. So one obstacle which I would like to mention in the beginning is that even though we heard that there is not much time left, so there are just 1 or 2 negotiating sessions left until the next World Health Assembly, member states still do not agree on the text. So we see a big global north, global south divide, with the global north focusing more on the prevention part, and with the global side focusing more on topics such as access and benefit sharing or funding, not sufficiently supporting One Health in the international arena, even though it's being implemented nationally. Another point which we need to address is some member states see One Health as a burden. Even though it was already adopted in high-level global institutions and agreements. You might have heard of the ASEAN Leaders Declaration, where they really promote a One Health approach on national and regional level. One Health is rooted in equity, as we heard from Nina. It involves and enables communities to protect themselves. It also leads to a pooling of resources, and it provides a frame to enable financial and technical support among member states. It doesn't threaten international sovereignty as it might be perceived by some member states, because national strategies need to be developed based on national circumstances. And it's also up to member states to decide with whom they want to collaborate. Another obstacle which we would like to address here is the scope of prevention. So in order to really have effective and successful pandemic strategies ready, we need to address the entire scope from pandemic prevention to preparedness and response. And prevention needs to be defined in a way that it reduces the risk of zoonotic disease outbreaks and spillover events. So preventing a pathogen from spilling over from animals to humans. This is not sufficiently covered yet in the instrument. And additionally, some member states consider prevention being covered under the existing international health regulations, which Nina also mentioned before. So the IHR in short and the pandemic treaty provide the entire frame for pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. And some member states consider prevention being covered under the IHR. But this is not correct, because IHR is limited to post-outbreak. So meaning an outbreak happened and we want to contain the spread of disease. So we need to ensure that the pandemic treaty really addresses the entire scope from prevention, preparedness and response. Another obstacle is coordination on international as well as national level. So internationally, this would mean working across instruments. We will hear from Adeline a little bit later more about other instruments, but important to mention here would be CVD, CITES, when it's about collaborating with institutions, organizations. Nina already mentioned the World Organization for Animal Health, FAO, UNEP, or of course WHO, and also financial mechanisms. On national level, it would mean working across ministries, so involving all relevant stakeholders. This could be, this is for sure the Ministry of Health. This can also be the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, and we need a coordination mechanism across these ministries to effectively and efficiently work together. So what is needed, based on the obstacles which I just summarized, is a balanced prevention, preparedness, and response approach. We also need to work on trust building. Equity needs to be seen as a priority. And this means bridging this gap between developing and developed countries, or global north, global south countries. Another point where we very much need your support is supporting and advising member states when developing their national One Health plans. There are several means of implementation, like the One Health Champion of Action and the implementation guide, which can be of help here, which can serve as an orientation for member states on how to develop pandemic strategies and also implement those. We need to secure funding for One Health and pandemic prevention and anchor this also in the pandemic treaty. We need to break institutional silos as well as silos, as ministerial silos. This would mean following a whole of society and whole of government approach. Whole of society means involving also civil society, involving relevant stakeholders beyond the ministries, beyond decision makers. And whole of government means involving all relevant political stakeholders, stakeholders within the different ministries. And what is needed here is a science to policy approach. So we heard it's important to prevent the outbreak and spillover of diseases. This is defined by, for example, the One Health high-level expert panel, and there are also other concepts and approaches which can be used for effective pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. So, what can we do to engage in the different processes? We have the international level and we have the national level. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the international level, which is basically the pandemic treaty we are focusing on. And Nina will tell you a little bit more about the national level in a minute. So about the international level, there are two ways how you could engage in the pandemic treaty process. So either you are already in official relations with the WHO, I'm going to tell you more about this in a second, or you can become an NXE stakeholder. So we need to remember that there are only a maximum of 2 sessions left, one in March and one in April. So we need to really act quickly if you are not yet registered as an NXE stakeholder. So NXE stakeholders have specific rights compared to other stakeholders. It can be either organizations or also individuals. They have access to certain hearings or sessions. They can submit written statements, and they can also join sessions which are not accessible to other organizations or individuals. So like the opening or closing sessions of the ANB, the negotiating sessions. This would be one example. It is decided by member states. The process is quite simple. You just need to draft an application letter, submit it to your ambassador in Geneva, where the pandemic treaty is being negotiated, or contact a government representative you have good relationships with. You can see the list of NXE stakeholders when you click on this link here on the slide. We, of course, will share it afterwards. And you can apply as an NXE stakeholder if you are an academic institution, a civil society organization, indigenous populations and communities, also as private sector entities or as individual experts. I want to show you how we did it, how our application letter looked like. You can see here the example. You can feel free to use the text, feel free to copy paste and submit it to your point of contact in the government or in the embassy. You just need to mention why your entity is qualified as engaging in the process, more information about your entity, why it's important that also the animal welfare sphere is being represented in this process. You can then attach this profile, which you can see on the second side, on the right side here, adding the name of a stakeholder, website, or any other online source which they can access, and a focal point. And then again, a profile and rationale why you are, why you should be included in this process. So this is one possibility. Another possibility to engage in the pandemic treaty process is via being in official relations with the WHO. This is not limited to the pandemic treaty process. So this is more general than the Annex E process. It is a privilege that the executive board might grant you if you are an NGO, an international business association, or a philanthropic foundation. You need to have had and continue to have a sustained and systematic engagement in the interest of the organization. The aims and activities of all these entities shall be in conformity with the WHO Constitution, and you should contribute to advancing public health. These applications are reviewed once a year in January in the executive board meetings. And also existing collaborations are reviewed in the January executive board meetings. We also included the more detailed process. I don't want to go too much into detail. There is also the link to the handbook where you can find all the additional information. You need a WHO technical department and technical officer you're in touch with who will help us with finalizing the application. And you need to be at least 2 or 3 years in collaboration with WHO. And this will give you more access to meetings such as the World Health Assembly. And now I'm handing over again to Nina to continue with the impact of engaging in such processes.
Thank you, Teresa. So when we engage in these processes and talk to member states, convince them to place animal welfare into international processes, we are getting them to commit to implementing plans nationally to improve animal welfare. We're also positioning animal welfare.
Sorry, Nina, you only have 1 minute left.
Yes,
it's okay. It's okay, Nicola. It's okay.
Okay.
Please wrap up in 2 or 3 minutes, Nina.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah,
so we're also positioning animal welfare organizations in international processes. This is important because it raises the profile of animal welfare in the international arena, and we are laying the foundation for future projects. On the national level, what we're doing, so as organizations, so also with everyone in this event, is we're strengthening relationships with governments. We're advising them on how they can develop national plans. We get to promote animal welfare priorities through prevention of spillover via One Health approach, and we track and implement One Health initiatives. And here, if you need any materials to do that, for PAWS and the group of NGOs working on pandemics can support. Jackson mentioned ASEAN, the ASEAN group of countries, and here we have a strong basis to work with on One Health. The ASEAN leaders put out a declaration when Indonesia was the president in 2023, where they fully supported the One Health approach with its more updated iterations that were created by the quadripartite institutions and One Health high-level expert panel. So you already have a basis of champions. You can work from this and say, your prime ministers already supported One Health. This is how we think your commitment can be implemented. And the prerequisites to successful advocacy here, we can think of it as 2 pillars. One of them is the targets, which are the member states, the governments. And here you need to be a strong, reliable partner. We need to be flexible and quick. We need to be a credible voice, make sure to build trust, give and take, give information, so that when we need something from member states, we can ask. Another important pillar is amplifiers, allies. We cannot achieve this goal alone as animal welfare organizations. We have to work with academia, we have to work with human health institutions, agriculture stakeholders. So make sure to involve other stakeholders who are saying the same thing, but from their own perspective. And here, of course, you need strong messages, campaigning elements to support the advocacy, and dreaming big. This is important when we want to achieve global change. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nina and Teresa. I mean, I was pretty convinced coming into this conversation that there was that need and that there were those great opportunities, but it's really great to see examples and have really clear-cut sort of pathways as to both how, you know, organizations can engage in those different mechanisms, but equally importantly, how those mechanisms can then, you know, further facilitate your engagement at the national level. I think from a sort of a smaller NGO perspective, that's the type of thing that really helps to understand and contextualize why engaging in these processes is so critical to on-the-ground work. So thank you very much. So our final speaker is Adeline Lerambert. I'm hoping I have said your name correctly, Adeline. I know I butcher it every time. But yeah, I'll hand over to you now. And yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Thanks to Asia for Animals for inviting me to speak alongside three inspiring PAWS colleagues. And thanks to everyone who is following this webinar. I'll be talking about three UN multilateral environmental agreements, MEAs, that Born Free's small policy team, which I am a part of, has been engaging with and which deal with issues surrounding wild animals. And those are the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species. So I will be referring to them as CITES, CBD, and CMS because they're all mouthfuls. So we'll look at how they operate, their NGO participation frameworks, and hopefully sharing some experience on what it's like trying to influence these international instruments as an animal protection NGO will be useful in your advocacy choices and efforts. It's might be too far, yeah. So for those who don't know, Born Free, we are a UK-based organization, but our programmatic work, so conservation education policy, has a global reach, including in Asia. And our three main goals are to end the exploitation and suffering of wild animals, to protect wildlife and habitats, and to inspire respect for wild animals. So from a policy perspective, what we want to do is to reshape the narrative around wildlife protection and make legal changes in the areas of wildlife use, trade and crime, biodiversity conservation and recovery, animal health and welfare, and we want to ensure that wild animal protection is integrated with other policies as it is essential for sustainable development, as Jackson highlighted. So our scope of priorities led us to look closely at the international agreements that have a mandate to address these issues. And they include these 5 institutions, among a few others, but some were covered by my fellow speakers, and there won't be enough time to cover them all. There is overlap in terms of the issues covered. So, for example, wildlife use, trade, they're addressed at CITES, of course, but also within the CBD and the HRPF. But yeah, in a nutshell, CITES deals with the international trade in endangered species, and Born Free has been involved since COP7 in 1989. CMS works specifically on the conservation of migratory species, and we've been involved since COP11. So COP is Conference of the Parties. We'll come to it a bit later. And that was in 2014. CBD has a broad remit as it covers species, ecosystems, and genetic diversity, and we got involved in 2018 for COP14. And I've got the other two on there, but I'll only brush over them. They're here because they're really relevant for our fourth priority, especially. And also UNEP administers those three conventions as it is the global authority for the environment. So before you decide to engage in global policymaking, and in order to make the most of your engagement and be as effective as possible, it is essential to be aware of those elements, which I call the pre-advocacy checklist. So first, where does the instrument that you've identified sit within the wider UN system? What is it exactly that it's responsible for? Is it influential? Are there synergies with other instruments that you need to be aware of? And this will be useful for you to have clear and realistic goals in your advocacy. And second, each MEA has its own institutional structure, so you want to understand how decisions are made and by which of its governing bodies. You also want to know the impact that those decisions will have at national level, so looking at the obligations in terms of implementation, monitoring and evaluation, accountability, and possibly sanction mechanisms. And finally, if there are existing processes that would give you an entry point in your advocacy, and if so, what's the timeline? Thirdly, you need to know who represents you and work out who the national focal points are and how much power have been delegated to them by their government. Because in some government representatives, when they attend conferences, sometimes they can't make decisions on the hoof, and the decisions have to come from a higher authority, and for example, ministers instructing national delegations. So also useful to know is how well or how badly your government is complying and enforcing the agreement. And it's important to know if regional collaboration is common practice and who tends to lead those regional positions. We saw that in the WHO with the 6 countries who held the pen, as Teresa and Nina said. And finally, the texts of MEAs integrate stakeholder engagement modalities in sometimes similar, but always slight differences. So it's important to know exactly what your windows of opportunities are and the modalities for engagement. Each MEA set out their own rules of procedures, which tell you what you can or what you cannot do when attending meetings under the instrument. And also important is to understand the existing networks of stakeholders, to be aware of other lobbying asks and strategies, and potentially form alliances with like-minded organizations. So this is a simplified map of the UN system to show you where our 3 MEAs sit. So their secretariats are all administered by UNEP, but based in different regions. UNEP also organizes the Environment Assembly. Most meetings of the 3 MEAs are attended by civil servants that belong to government ministries. and they usually are from the Ministry of Environment or Foreign Affairs. Looking at CITES, so CITES is the only international agreement designed exclusively to regulate wildlife trade, and it does that by trying to ensure the legality, sustainability, and traceability of any international trade transaction involving the species it covers. It only regulates cross-border trade in the 41,000 odd species listed on its 3 appendices. So about 16% of that are animals. And CITES measures are negotiated by national government delegates. So those decision-making processes are fundamentally political in nature, and the degree to which they are effectively implemented and enforced varies enormously depending on the country. CITES has no jurisdiction at national level. It is legally binding, but specific domestic measures need to be adopted for the convention to be implemented. However, there are potential penalties for parties that fail to adhere to the convention in the form of trade sanctions and even trade suspensions. And in terms of governance structure, the Conference of the Parties meets every 2 to 3 years and decides by vote, if necessary, on changes to CITES rules, for example, adding new species to the list of those protected, or changing the level of protection applied, or changing the documentation requirements associated with trade in these species. The Standing Committee oversees the implementation of the convention based on the instructions provided by the COP, and it meets annually, and the Animal and Plant Committees provide scientific and advice and technical support. It's not on the screen, but intersessional working groups can also be set up to progress the work in between the meetings, and there can be limitations in terms of the number of observer representatives to ensure they don't exceed the number of party members. So our goals at CITES have been particularly focused on implementation and compliance, and on strengthening restrictions on international trade in live animals. In terms of achievements, we've helped to secure the global ban on international commercial trade in pangolins, restrictions on trade in African lion parts, the regulation of trade in giraffes, and the current moratorium on trade in live wild-caught African elephants to zoos and other captive facilities in the world. We're engaging as Born-Free, but also as part of the Species Survival Network, which is one of the main, if not the main, coalition of over 80 NGOs, of which we're a founding member. I'm moving on as quickly as possible. So the CBD, so this is a convention that is seen as one of the more complex conventions, as that's because its remit is huge. It sets out general principles and commitments on an extensive range of issues related to biodiversity. It is considered a framework convention overarching the more specific MEAs that deal with particular aspects of environmental conservation. So when CITES is a species-focused convention, the CBD deals with issues holistically within the concept of sustainable use. So for instance, CITES and CBD both address the threat of extinction, but CBD tends to favor development and positively promoting the use of animals. This approach, which is really entrenched in the way that the convention operates, makes it more difficult for NGOs like us to advance our animal protection agenda. So a lot of the work, a lot of the advocacy is based on limiting the utilitarian narrative. So for example, at COP 15, we worked to prevent trophy hunting from being considered a sustainable management practice. Born-Free got involved at COP 14 when the process developing the new set of goals and targets for 2030 kicked off and culminated at COP 15 at the end of 2022. with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And a dedicated working group with other NGO members of the World Federation for Animals was also formed and joined the efforts. And so now for NGOs involved, the advocacy is focused on making sure that the indicators for monitoring the progress on the new targets are adequate and that the framework is implemented properly. CMS aims to conserve migratory species throughout their ranges. It was created because the journeys of migratory species do not adhere to political boundaries, and so their survival depends on international collaboration and transboundary conservation efforts. COP14 took place last month, and we were there as Born Free to support proposals to better conserve elephants, chimpanzees, big cats, sharks, whales. And some of the achievements were the listing of the Eurasian lynx, the Pallas's cat, and the sand tiger shark to the appendices. It works similarly to CITES in that sense. And as you can see, it also has a pretty similar governance structure, including, like CITES, intersessional working groups. It also has, like the CBD, it is also considered a framework convention, meaning that separate instruments evolve from it. And these can be legally binding treaties or less formal agreements, such as memoranda of understanding or species initiatives. And for example, 26 Asian countries have signed an MOU on birds of prey, and there is one on the conservation of the dugong. CMS also addresses cross-cutting issues such as climate change, ecotourism, wildlife health, and zoonotic diseases. And the convention plays a big part in the implementation of other globally agreed mechanisms. So from our animal protection point of view, CMS can be considered a rather progressive convention in that it does work on, for instance, the importance of animal culture and social complexity, which recognizes the role of individual animals in its population and habitat. So yeah, its inputs to the work of other agreements are usually positive. And it is also quite open to civil society contributions, for instance, encouraging NGOs to contribute ideas to improve the text of its decisions or to add information to their documents. And we became an official partner organization in 2018. So moving on to representation, these maps show that they show the contracting parties for each MEA. So just focusing on CMS, I'd like to note that the Philippines is the only party member among ASEAN countries. Nations considered non-party have not signed or ratified the treaty. And are therefore not bound to it. And as NGOs, trying to get your government to sign and ratify the convention could be part of your advocacy strategy. However, half of ASEAN, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, as well as China, have agreed to memorandums of understanding with the convention. You can, for all of these conventions, you can find lists of your national focal points online fairly easily. So to participate as an NGO in the proceedings of CITES, CBD, and CMS, the modalities are very similar and they're set out in each convention's text and their rules of procedure. So basically you need to be an organization qualified in the relevant fields and express your interest to attend by writing to the respective secretariat. You must apply for accreditation for each meeting, but usually international NGOs who have attended previous meetings are afforded automatic accreditation. And typically observers participate in negotiations without the right to vote. And there is a rule that if 1/3 of the parties present at the meeting objects, you are then denied access, although I've never witnessed this. It is important that NGOs make their voices heard in the international negotiations, by, for example, providing expertise to government delegates or sharing information with the Secretariat, by proposing text to influence official decisions, by holding a side event, or making interventions on the floor if given the opportunity. And finally, these are milestone meetings that are happening this year. And our strategies are very much crafted around those meetings, but we work well in advance with NGO partners and informally with government officials. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for listening. And of course, don't hesitate if you have questions.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Adeline. And yes, just to reiterate that last request, you know, if you do have questions, even as we're addressing a few, please do pop them in the chat, because that'll really help us to sort of get to the heart of the issues that you know are relevant to this group of attendees. So thank you very much to all the presenters. I think, you know, that was a tour de force in terms of covering so much ground, so many different mechanisms that it is possible to engage in. I mean, I suppose, you know, it definitely brings to mind a lot of the engagement that we've had. You know, I'm part of a team of literally 2.5 people who actually dedicate any time to engaging in some of these mechanisms. We're engaged, for example, through CITES, and, you know, it really has been such a steep learning curve, I think, as a small entity, you know, trying to understand, you know, and balance the resources that you can allocate, the time investment expected, you know, how much time is actually necessary for you to be, you know, a good contributor in these environments. And I think that's something that really needs to be reckoned with by each organization on an individualized level. And then I think, you know, one of the real benefits that we've had from being part of mechanisms like Species Survival Network is really being able to benefit from the coalition's sort of collective knowledge. And I think that's something, particularly as smaller organizations looking to figure out, you know, where are the purchase points, where can you make a meaningful intervention? It's really essential to have that guidance from organizations, you know, that in some cases have been dealing in these mechanisms for, you know, 30 years. Or since their founding, or have people who were integral to the founding of some of these mechanisms. I think that's something that really cannot be underestimated, both in terms of guiding you. I mean, I think, Adeline, you pointed out quite validly the sort of, you know, being very cognizant of the existing networks and the efforts that are going on. I think all too often, you know, there's stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And if you're not in the room where it's happening, it's so difficult to know exactly what the dialogue is, what stage it's at. And you could very easily put your foot in it and, you know, sort of undo years of really fantastic work by advocating, or, I mean, from you know, the experience that we have in Hong Kong, for example, you know, it doesn't take all that much to create ambiguity in what organizations are campaigning or advocating for. I mean, the nuance of what Jackson was saying in terms of advocacy versus activism, you know, I think advocacy is where you get the collective voices sort of coalesced. And I think that it's so important that you do have a unified front, because ultimately all of our organizations are working towards the same ends. We're trying to improve the outcomes for living beings. And that's fundamentally a really key objective of all of our work. And it's so essential that we're not treading on each other's toes, that we're not introducing uncertainty and ambiguity, which could allow, you know, say, counter proponents perhaps, or governments that aren't particularly willing to take, for, you know, more progressive action. It's important that we don't give them any ammunition or opportunity to not take the very necessary actions that so many of these groups, I mean, particularly on this call, have been advocating for. So thank you guys. You know, huge amount of food for thought. I guess I'll hand over to a couple of the questions that have come up. So I suppose this might be particularly relevant for Jackson, but please, anybody else who's got a view, please do chime in. So one of the questions was, how do you navigate the challenges associated with representing animal welfare interests alongside other environmental and human-focused agendas in United Nations discussions?
Thanks, Sam. So that's a really great question. We definitely we just have to think about it. We don't frame animal welfare as a separate issue from the environment or from human development. It is an integral part of how people live in the places that we go and we see, particularly at the grassroots level. People live in a way that is in harmony, typically, with nature. So nature is not doing well, people don't do well, animals don't do well. If we believe that, then by harnessing the language and the policy work that we do to speak to that point that animal welfare equals human well-being equals a healthy environment. And if those three components are actually integrated and considered by policymakers, then typically society does better. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's also probably an opportune moment for organizations, I guess, to be engaging in these mechanisms because, I mean, as was pointed out by Nina and Teresa, we are obviously living in the wake of a pretty significant pandemic that shut down the entire planet. So I think everybody, front of mind, everybody is aware that there is this inherent risk to not seriously considering our relationship to wildlife and appreciating that those, One Health is just a logical, One Health, One Welfare is obviously a logical paradigm through which to see the world we're living in. I suppose, I mean, do you feel that even before the pandemic, even without the pandemic, were we on the right trajectory? Were we on an optimistic curve towards actually addressing wildlife? Was this general awareness amongst policy makers within these mechanisms? Do you think it was going in the right direction, or was COVID actually a really significant inflection point that has helped or hindered the movements going forward, or the movement moving forwards? To any of the speakers, I guess.
Maybe Adeline, because you've been working more closely on the wildlife track. Have you noticed a difference?
Oh, Adeline?
Yeah, sorry, I think I missed part of it because my sound went.
No worries. Yeah, so I mean, the question was essentially, so do you feel that, with or without the COVID pandemic, were we on a trajectory for sort of greater consideration and awareness of the integral relationship between humans and wildlife? Was there sort of this arc towards progressive policy making amongst the parties, or has COVID really played an essential sort of inflection point in driving us towards, this heightened awareness that I think we might be facing now?
Yeah, I think it's definitely given us a new hook, and with the amount, all the new science that's been produced around the interlinkages between human and animal health in particular has helped a lot in all the forums, and now a lot of conventions are dealing with, are looking at health more than before.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. So just looking at some of the questions that have come in. Oh, Jackson's got a few. I'm going to try and get to some of those, Jackson. But so another one that actually I think is more directed at Jackson. So are there any pathways which NGOs should prioritize if starting with policy advocacy? So, for example, you highlighted the NGO forum within SCAP. Is there any particular pathway which you've seen to be more effective for that NGO engagement?
So great questions, Sam. There are many ways to engage. It really depends on your organization's capacity, your interest, depending on what your organization's working on. If you come to the Policy Coalition with your particular focus, we can help direct you. So Ngoc Anh was able to direct you to possibly the right fora for that. And for every single one of these conventions that was talked about, there is a different body in the region. So we would ask you to come in, get you prepared, and then we would introduce you, of course, to the regional body where you can start listening in and understanding what is their topic, what is their focus, and then help you with a way to get your message in to make that a priority, because we will help resound and coalesce the language that we will all speak to. So is there a way? Yes. To start, let's have a look at all of the previous documents that have been collected that AFA has access to through the policy platform or the policy coalition. And then join the calls just to learn a little more, know who the players are at the international level and also on the regional level. And then we will make sure that you get slotted into the right topic that makes sense for you. I know that some of our audience is focused on, say, rabies or dogs and cats or stray animals. Just so you know, ICAM is trying to work on how to do that at the UN. We know many other groups who are, so we can connect you to the right people so you can understand the language, and what your contribution is would be what makes sense for you at a national level for your particular situation, and how do we convey that so that there is a more holistic approach. So that's what's needed.
Yeah, really great. Thank you, Jackson. I mean, I mean, the overwhelming evidence is that, you know, coalition building is so essential to all of this. And I think, you know, as I said in response to one of the presentations before, you know, it is really important, I think, also to understand, you know, how can all of this coalition building also feed back into your work. And so that leads me into the next question. And again, this is an ope to all speakers. But one of the questions was, how do you measure the impact of your organization's participation in these UN forums and conferences, and how do you sort of, I guess, tangibly know that you've had a material effect within these mechanisms? Because of course that, you know, fundamentally, if I'm as a small organization, you do need to be justifying, you know, the amount of time, resources, you know, the flights, all the things that come along with actually being present at these engagements. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts and reflections on that. Anyone willing? Nina?
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in on that. So the important thing that we need to keep in mind is that the impact of our work in these international processes does not happen specifically during that 1 or 2 weeks of negotiations. It's an effort that we build through months. So you write to member states, you share your position papers, you ask for meetings ahead of the negotiations, you find out from them where they agree with you and where they think there are obstacles to what we're asking for, and then we adapt our strategy based on that. So what it means is, with every conversation that we have with them, we know exactly what they need us to share with them so that we can make a difference. And then the way we measure our impact is, has our wording been taken up in the legal text? Have governments that we mapped to be on the fence, so not necessarily for our elements, but also not against, have the ones that have been on the fence moved towards a more positive positioning? Have all the obstacles that we were told were in the way of what we're asking for been addressed? So, you know, we do, for example, webinars with member states or events to bring experts to explain to them why what we're asking for is important, or how they can operationalize what we're asking for, or what kind of legal formulation works. And then based on that, we measure whether their positions have changed, whether the amount of opposition for what we've been asking for has been reduced or not. So after every negotiation, we look at the legal text, we see these points are in, other points are still in jeopardy. Who can we ask to help us so that we can convince member states that what we're asking for is important? So the litmus test is, in the end, what's in the legal text and how many governments who were on the fence are starting to become more supportive. And the ones that are opposing, what we need to do is we need to make sure that there's enough pressure from other member states on them to not block, or to find out what do they need so that they stop blocking our points.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Nina. I mean, that's perfect answer, I think, to that specific question. So another one that's come up within the chat is, so why are there such different considerations for the global north and the global south? How can the global south be more aligned to the One Health approach and spillover prevention? And then, is it also about access to financing and equity to information / supplies / vaccines / medicines? Do I have a volunteer to address that?
I can take this one, if I may.
Fantastic, please.
Thanks for the question, Jackson. So we heard in my presentation earlier, Global North is focusing on promoting more One Health and pandemic prevention, also including really the concrete drivers of outbreaks in the text. And Global South is more focusing on financing, pathogen access and benefit sharing, which is understandable. So the reason why is mainly strategic considerations. So One Health is being used as a negotiating bargaining chip. And as long as financing and also the access and benefit sharing are not clarified, Global South, but also Global North countries are not willing to move from their original positions. And as I said, it's understandable from what we saw with COVID-19. We need to really ensure equitable access to products and services, and we need to support countries who need support technically and financially. And at the same time, we need to show that One Health and also pandemic prevention, so prevention of zoonotic spillover, are the best way to achieve equity, because it allows us, it enables communities who are really working or living at the front lines, so those communities who are in touch with animals, who are involved in wildlife activities, live animal markets, other risky practices, to transition to more sustainable livelihoods, to protect themselves from pathogens, and transition to less risky livelihoods, as I mentioned. Additionally, what is important to mention is that such national One Health action plans can also serve as a sort of a frame or basis for enabling technical and financial support, setting the guidelines of what is needed to really create projects which are eligible for funding. I hope this gives a little bit more insights.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm very cognizant that we're running out of time. But I think we might be able to squeeze in one last question, although I would like to maybe highlight to everybody on the call. So one of the points that Jackson has raised, which I think is just, it doesn't have to be dealt with by any of the speakers, but just as a general comment to the group, are there any participants interested in learning more about international advocacy, and what are the topics the audience is working on and are interested in? So please, I think maybe if you could provide those into the chat, or please write into the AFA team. I think we'd be really interested, just as a broad coalition of people, to hear, more about what you're up to, what you're interested in, and how we can do more talks like this that will really get to the heart of issues that you need support on. I think that's a fundamental part there. So one of the other questions that jumps out, I guess, is what are the common, sorry, this is probably a big question for the last one, but I think it is quite an important one. What are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes to avoid when advocating for policy language at the national and international levels, and how can organizations mitigate these risks? Now, I think everybody's going to have a point on this, but I think this is a really essential one to close out on. Do I have a volunteer to go first? Yeah, Nina.
I can share one sentence. So the biggest pitfall is developing policy language without talking to member states. We have to talk to them. We have to figure out where their positions are so that we can formulate the policy language in a way that gets taken up.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yes, and I would add to that that even government positions evolve. So getting the latest draft of the documents is really key as well.
Absolutely. Teresa, Jackson, any reflections?
I'd like to add one. Be aware that you need to be the strong partner and the critical voice at the same time, and that you cannot, as Nina mentioned before, start engaging with stakeholders at a certain session. You really need to build long-term relationships, and it's better to start now than tomorrow.
Yeah. Jackson?
Yeah, to follow up on what Teresa's just said, so to build those relationships, the way you get started is participate in your regionals. Come with us. Just so you know, regionals actually can have funding for you to attend. So they sponsored me for some of these. If you apply and you're part of the system, they will sponsor you. So you can attend, you can meet with other NGOs, you can meet with the member states in a open kind of forum, so it's less stressful. You get to discuss all those topics that we just mentioned, understanding the national point of view, learning the language, the priorities, and all of those will really contribute to your refinement of what you want that aligns with the member states to get what everybody wants, which is more animal welfare.
Fantastic. Jackson, you nicked my conclusion, so thank you. You made my job a lot easier. But thank you very much to all the speakers, and obviously to AfA for facilitating what I think is a really invaluable dialogue. Ngoc Anh, thank you very much for facilitating as well. I'll hand the floor back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam, and big thank you to all of our speakers for today's sessions. And our team would really appreciate any feedback you may have for our event. And you may find the link to the feedback form in the chat box or on the screen right here. So the link to the feedback form is right here. And I'll leave it a moment for people to catch it. And in June, we'll also continue to have a few more Connect sessions like this one under these themes. All the information is available on our website. And we also have a couple of in-person events in Hanoi, Vietnam in October, and a couple of events in the Philippines and India with dates to be confirmed. Again, all these information is on our website at asiaforanimals.com/events. And we also have a couple of podcast episodes covering a wide variety of topics from policy advocacy to companion animals issues, wildlife protections, and so on. If you want to continue joining our sessions on fundraising, please stay in the breakout rooms. Or if you want to check out our other sessions, please move to the main room. And this will be your instructions. And now we move to the coffee break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.